Hey there, what I see is people letting their businesses run their lives versus them leading their business to love their life. I see this in corporate jobs, and I see where we step into expectations that other people have of us that do not honor us and allow us to lead our own life. Welcome to this episode, and I'm glad you're here to listen. From the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I am Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what's important to them. I see way too many businesses running people's lives versus people having the lives that they want and letting the business be a conduit to help that happen. So that is my goal and mission in life. And today, I really want to talk about and continue this series on the universal laws. Excuse me. And the law I want to talk about today, I've talked about a couple of times on a podcast, and it's one that means a lot to me. That is also one that has helped me make behavior changes. And it's the law of cause and effect. And basically, it's similar to for every action, there is a reaction. So for every action that we take, there is a reaction that occurs. Now, the law of cause and effect is an interesting one in the respect that ultimately it can help us change behaviors. But I've also seen where people sometimes can use that then to beat themselves up. And so one of the things that I would really recommend is, as you listen to this, when this resonates with you, try really hard. I've talked before about the critical parent. I want you to try really hard to look at the law of cause and effect through the lens of curiosity, not through judgment, not through oh, I'm ridiculous. I didn't do this. I know better. I shouldn't have eaten that. I should have done this differently, because that's the critical parent coming out. So the law of cause and effect, when I actually read the definition of it, it says nothing happens by chance. Everything you experience in the world is an effect of a cause that has been set in motion. So effects become causes of new effects because there's this train of causation, and I'll kind of unpack this here in a minute. As first cause, meaning we are first cause, everything that you set in motion returns to you, the causal source, as a result. So let's break this down. When you think about the law of cause and effect, I want to talk about the fact that we are first cause. We only have the choice. Well, we have multiple choices to go do things differently. But when we look at ourselves, that's really the only place that we can make change. So when I look at something that's happening in my life, I have to look at what was I calling in. So for instance, I was actually talking to a client just today about something that they were kind of sad about, that they were upset about, that they were taking a little bit personally. But when we broke it down and backed up a little bit, we realized that this person was calling in something differently. Their desire was something different. So therefore, they were taking actions because they didn't want to be involved in this particular group anymore. And so they had claimed it and started taking some actions around that. But then when the universe answered, or God, whatever spirit that you want to associate with there, when for this person, God then said, okay, you've asked for this. You don't want to be a part of this anymore. So we're going to start moving it over in this direction. Because we start taking actions towards that, then what happens is we don't necessarily do the things that we were doing in this other group, but then we want to hang on to it because we find value there. Well, when you can step back and say, oh, I did ask for this, and it's not personal, it's the universe answering our request. It can sometimes help you to step back from that. Now, also looking at first cause. If you have something that you want to happen in your life, So for instance, I'm a skier, I'm not a snowboarder. If I wanted to be an Olympic gold medalist snowboarder at my age, I don't know. But I think when I look at it, desire is causative. And if I wanted it bad enough, I think of the movie Rudy. And if you haven't watched that movie, I highly suggest you go watch it, where this kid wanted to play for, I think it's Notre Dame. He wanted to play there all of his life. He wanted to play there. So he did everything possible. He worked out harder than anyone else. He showed up to football practices, even though he wasn't part of the team. He started helping the team. He did all of these things. And the last game of his senior year, all the players are like, put Rudy in, let him like play, because this is such a dream of his. And so he accomplished that dream. And so desire is causative. And if I really wanted to, I could go out and learn to snowboard. And if I wanted to, I could go out and spend 8 hours a day and go to New Zealand and visit my friends in New Zealand during the summer and go snowboarding, and I could make it happen. Now, there are some things physiologically that when I look at it, I may or may not be a WNBA player, but it's also not what I want to do. So when we think about first cause, I recommend to people to think about what it is that you want. And I don't mean this in the egotistical way. I don't mean this in the way of being like the person in the little girl in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It's the come from, like, think about what you want, whether it be in physical health, spiritual health, mental and emotional health, intellectual health, whether it be your environment that you're in, whether it be in business, whether it be in finance, whether it be in relationships, whether it be in how you show up in your community. Like, really get crystal clear on what it is that you want. Now, we are first cause. And if the result is not coming back to us and we know, like, we really want this, typically there's something stopping us. And please hear me, I hate, and I don't use that word very often, the word self-sabotage. To me, the word self-sabotage creates this negative vibration of guilt and shame, because we're smart people. If we knew what was stopping us, we would stop doing it. But a lot of times we have these double binds where we say we want something really badly, but ultimately deep down inside, we want something different. Or we've made a contract with someone, a loyalty pact, whether it be with our parents or someone else that we're trying to stay loyal to, that maybe the action that we take might say that they're wrong about something. And therefore, we don't want to do that to make them wrong. And it's in the subconscious brain. I've talked about brain science before. It is in the subconscious brain, and we're not aware. Sometimes we're aware, but we're frightened. We're afraid. We don't either know how to take the first step, or we're afraid to take the first step, and we need a different perspective. I've said before, I have a business coach because I'm too close to my own things. And so therefore, when we go to take that first step, sometimes it can look like a chasm that's like the Grand Canyon, when in fact, once we take the step in faith, which is a whole nother podcast, we take that step and we realize it's just a crack in the sidewalk. And then we continue to take the next step and the next step. But fear creates this perception that it's the size of the Grand Canyon that we need to take in that step. So we are first cause, and it's important to look back and say, what is it that I'm doing that's creating the result that's there? And when I work with clients, I ask them to think about, now I'm not much of a complainer, so some people get tied up in the actual verbiage of this, but I want you to hear the intention of this. What do you complain about? What frustrates you about something? So if we're talking about, say, business, what do you complain about in your business or in your career? What frustrates you about your business or your career? And then what are you tolerating? And the toleration sometimes is hard, because that is something that we're allowing to happen, right? And we may not have been aware of it. You may not have even been aware of it until you heard this podcast, and until you sit down and start to write it out, it may not come to you, because there are in-depth messages that are in our subconscious that come out when we're dealing with fear, when we're dealing with stepping forward. So we're first cause, and we set things in motion. Now, what this talks about too, about everything you experience in the world is an effect of a cause that was set in motion. So a lot of times I talk to my clients about, if you think about a circle, we have patterns, and in those patterns, we continue in that same pattern. And some coaches you've heard talk about being in the hamster wheel. That's what they're referring to, in that over and over again pattern. And so what happens is, in order to break that pattern, we have to step back and say, what effect do I want? If I want to have 20 private clients, I want to do 2 major events a year, and I want to speak publicly, then I need to look at those things and say, what actions am I taking to create that effect? And so some people would say, okay, an effect sounds like a goal. It's not necessarily a goal. It's, here's what I want, which then can equate into a goal. But when you're in the moment, stepping back and saying, what effect do I want? And are the actions that I'm taking getting me further away or closer to the effect that I want? If it's getting me farther away, then I have a choice, and I can make that choice in the moment to break the cycle. Sometimes I continue the cycle and I step back and then try to analyze it. And sometimes I justify and come up with excuses about not doing it. But ultimately, if the desire is deep enough, then you figure out a way to create the effect. And the cause is the actions that create the effect that you want, which is why I suggest to people to look at, what do you complain about? What are you frustrated about? And what are you tolerating in certain areas in your life? Because ultimately, that's typically what you don't want. And you've heard me talk about enough too, that when you focus on what you don't want, wherever you focus is where you go. That's like a flashlight, or if you have a headlamp when you're camping, you go where the light is shining. So ultimately, you want to get really crystal clear on what you want so that you know what the effect is that you want. You can't stop and break a cycle of something if you don't know what effect you really truly want. If you know you don't want a certain effect, you might stop and pause for a moment, but then you end up doing something that takes you towards the effect that you don't want, because that's what you're focused on. Then you beat yourself up. You end up with black and blue eyes, and you've been super critical with yourself. And that takes you down in your vibrational energy and stops the momentum of you going towards what you want. So again, defining what you want is really critical to be able to stop that pattern. And that's what, when it says effects become causes of new effects in a train of causation, meaning that when we have an effect, we have actions, the causes that create us moving towards the effect that we want. And it's kind of like being in A and point B. You're never at point A and you're never at point B. You're always in between. Because when you're at point A and decide you want to move to point B, you're no longer at point A. Same thing holds true when you get to B. Usually you look at the next one, C, and try to go to C. That's what that means about a train of causation that gets you there. And it's a level of awareness. Now, a big piece of the law of cause and effect goes into a subsidiary law, which is the law of personal responsibility. Now, many of you know and have heard my podcasts on the 12 guiding principles that I try to live by. And the first one is, I'm 100% responsible for myself, and I'm 100% responsible to you. I'm responsible to show up as my best self to you, but I'm not responsible for you. And that's what the law of personal responsibility says. We have to grow up and take responsibility for our lives. We are 100% responsible for our results. Taking responsibility actually empowers us to put in a new cause into effect. So if I'm trying to attain a goal, so for right now, I'll share with you, I've been trying to simplify at my house. So this weekend, I dove in literally into my pantry. And my pantry is like a small walk-in closet. And my friend and I joke that it's the troll hole, and it gets to be so full you can't see anything. And she has a little closet underneath her staircase that's kind of the same. And so this thing has bothered me for months. And it's taken energy away from me being able to set into motion things that I've been wanting to set into motion, because I keep thinking about it, right? It's in there. So this weekend, I'm like, why am I waiting? Just dig in. So I jumped in. It took me about 3 hours to go through everything, and I cleaned out. Now I'm embarrassed to say I had some almond flour and tapioca flour and some things that were dated back to 2017. But what that said to me then too is my systems for what I have, things in bins, I forget that I have those things there. So I need to make them more visible. So it helped me then in a train of causation, create a different effect. I wasn't using some of the food that I had, which now has inspired me to go through my freezer. So I haven't used some of the food that I have because I couldn't see it. I didn't know it was there unless I dug for it. And so cleaning out my pantry to have a clean pantry in my environment allowed me then to identify another system. So that's kind of that train of causation. So when we think about the law of cause and effect, then I took responsibility for it and said, I'm responsible for this result. I can't expect anybody else to come out and clean out my pantry. And if it's taking energy from me, I can continue to stay in that story, or I can change that story and just dig in and get it done. So that's what I did. So that is an example of how the law of cause and effect works in kind of an everyday situation. Same thing in business. When I look at connecting with people as part of what I do. And I love to connect with people. When I'm not connecting with people and building momentum, it's hard for people to know what I do. And so for me, part of that effect is allowing people to know what I do so that if I can be of service, that someone will reach out to me. Another example of the law of cause and effect. There are some other subsidiary laws here, but I'm not going to go into those today. We'll look at those at another time. If you have any questions about the law of cause and effect, you want to talk more about the law of cause and effect and how it's potentially impacted you and your life, please reach out to me at www.leadyourlituplife. That link is in the show notes. I would love to have a 30-minute free conversation with you. No pressure about anything. It's just an opportunity for you to get really clear on what you want. And I promise you, you'll be clearer at the end of that 30 minutes than you were when we started. So go out, sign up for a clarity conversation. And with that, it's a wrap. Have a fantastic week, and we will talk to you next week.